podcast is with me, Ibrahim Asanko. I am the host of this show. And tonight on the Dialectic Space podcast, the conversation turns to one of the most consequential figures in the political history of the Gambia, former Vice President Bakary Bunja Dabo, otherwise famously called Bibi Dabo. For nearly 3 decades, Mr. Dabo occupied some of the most critical positions in the Gambian state, rising to the ranks of civil service at a time when the country was still consolidating its independence. He became part of the first generation of Gambian technocrats tasked with building and managing the institution of young republic, the Gambia. His career would eventually span diplomacy, um, ministerial leadership, and a decade as vice president under Sir Dawda Jawara, placing him at the center of some of the most defining moments of the First Republic. His tenure in government intersected with events that continue to shape the country's political memory: the 1981 coup d'etat, the creation of the Senegambia Confederation, and the complex internal dynamics of governance during the Jawara era. Later, like many political figures of that generation, his life would also be touched by the upheaval of the 1994 Gambian coup d'etat, which ushered in a radically different chapter in the country's political history. But beyond the offices he held, Mr. Dabo represents a living bridge between the different eras of Gambian politics, from the optimism and the institution buildings of early republic through crisis and exile and into the ongoing debates about the country's democratic future. Tonight's conversation is therefore less about biography and more about perspective. It is an opportunity to reflect on the decision made during pivotal moments in the nation's history, to revisit the ambitions and contradictions of the First Republic, and to hear from someone who witnessed those events from inside the very center of power. Your Excellency, Mr. Dabo, welcome to the Dialectic Space podcast. How are you doing?
Ibrahim, thank you very much. I'm doing well. My pleasure and my delight to be received on your very popular program. Maybe you'll just allow me to use your airwaves to extend greetings, particularly Ramadan greetings to your many viewers and listeners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dabo. I'm very happy to have you here today. Let me also uh, hasten to add that Mr. Dabo is a native of Kiang Dumbuto. And I consider myself a native of Kiang as well. And so this is a conversation between two Kiankas today.
Yes.
And so for the Badibunkas who are in the comment section, you guys, if you're not very happy, it's not a problem. We are going to do our best to make sure we are kind and accommodating to all of you today. But Mr. Dabo, you're from Kiang, like I said, a region that has produced many prominent public servants and political figures in Gambian history. Before discussing the later political years, I think it is worth briefly reflecting on the foundations. What was Kiang like during your childhood, socially and economically, and how did the environment shape your outlook of life and leadership?
Oh, well, that must be referring to the period broadly after the Second World War, because I was uh, born around around the time, and I first 10 years or 11 years of my life in Kiang. Um, Kiang was very much uh, typical, typically rural Gambia at the time. It was um, life was very much uh, followed the pattern set for rural communities at the time, mainly farming and some other related activities. My own family uh, has always been active in trading and in farming. That has been the main thing. And Kiang was very much typical of rural Gambia, as I said.
Mhm.
It was easygoing, more for most part. In terms of composition, sociologically, you had was Kiang was, as still is, but pretty much microcosm of Gambia. You had different ethnic communities.
Mhm.
Majority, I think, was Manding, but of course you also had Fullers and some Jola settlements, and of course some other minorities coming and settled like Serets in small numbers. It was therefore, as I said, reflective of the kind of uh, ethnic mix that the Gambia has always been.
Mhm.
Um, Life was, of course, quite simple and very, generally very calm. We didn't have any social or political disputes that I can recollect at the time. It was very much a quiet area, as it were. Majority of people were occupied with farming. Uh, Life itself, as I said, was nothing to compare with the what you note in affluent societies elsewhere. But
Mhm.
it was also, in terms of the aspirations of the people at the time, you know, a happy place. I wasn't, I didn't know of not only conflict, but I also didn't know of any uh, on a degree of hardship, economic
Mhm.
or social, to the extent that I could hold it out as suffering for the people. I think it was a fairly good place to live at the time, and given the kind of aspirations the people had, they didn't aspire to many things that you and I now take for granted in modern
Mhm.
life.
Yeah.
So it was quite a happy place to live in. And as a young person growing up, I had a very uh, happy time there. That much I recall.
So, were there any early influences in terms of, either family members or teachers or people in your community that sort of played a role in shaping your sense of discipline and public responsibility in those days?
Well, I cannot rule out the fact that the bringing up I had in my family was one which emphasized, uh, work, hard work. We have to work very hard, but it also uh, inculcated, a community sense.
Mhm.
My father's house, or my community house, was one which was always full of people, visitors passing by. It was at a very early stage in my life that I realized that this is an essential part of obligations that fall on you, to have a sense of belonging to a community, and also contributing to help as much as you could.
Mhm.
I see this as possibly the early, early roots that led to my natural passion for public service in later life, when I completed my studies.
Mhm. So, how did your experience at school and later at university shape your intellectual outlook and ambition in life? And also to add that you are reported to be an economist, or you are an economist, you're also a lawyer as well. And so I think would be relevant for our audience to also understand how some of that intellectual journey shape your public life, but also your intellectual outlook.
Well, my education, in terms of my first university program or degree, was more in liberal arts, actually. I did more of modern languages and history. Um, this what skills or understanding of economics I acquired over time came much later after my first degree. But I should say that the, the benefits of liberal arts education, as you say, is to broaden one's horizons, one's thinking and approach to things. And certainly that did help a lot in later life, in pushing forward things that I have interest in, and which, as I said, relate pretty much to public service. So yes, the if you can call it the intellectual foundation,
Yes.
which went to help me, has been considerably enhanced by the education I had at the university level, different stages.
And so I'm also curious, and we didn't talk about this earlier, because you have such a very diverse intellectual foundation in terms of, a combination of economics and also a lawyer, and in some way a public servant too, which is very expansive and deep in terms of in terms of experience. And so I'm curious, how did this come about? Have you always been interested in law? Have you always, obviously you've established your interest in public service very early on, but when
Mhm.
has law become of interest to you, and also economics?
Well, interesting. As discipline, of course, I had always had a lot of respect for this some of these disciplines you talked about.
Hmm.
Economics is one, law is another. I got exposed to it particularly through friends at college who were in some of those disciplines. I took interest in them. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to study law earlier on. But later, when I happened to find myself in UK here and had some spare time on my hand, I decided to take up that old interest I had in law and took up a degree. I didn't actually practice it as such, as a in private practice, as it were, but I did the basic uh, training, both in the in substantive law and in vocational training to
Hmm.
qualify as a lawyer. But it's really an old interest I had all along, and when an opportunity presented itself, I took it up.
And last issue on your foundation. Also, we understand very well for most of your generation that come from that part of the country. At the time, there is most parents are resistant to send their kids to formal education system. What we knew or what they were familiar with was mostly the traditional institutions or faith-based institutions of education. Your parents would tell you, "I'm not going to send you to Babu Karawanto because of to Malevi, Luisila, so to speak." So, did you had to endure any of that, or where did formal education enter your family such that you were allowed to enter into the formal educational system?
Yeah, well, that's quite interesting. Yes, I've got my own experience of that kind of phenomenon you refer to. Um, I was born in the late 40s and early 50s. The the colonial government, as part of its modest efforts of expanding education, opened a school in Dumbuto. And that was the first opportunity we had. I think until then, I don't think my family was thinking of necessarily me going to school, as it were.
Mhm.
As a matter of fact, the earlier plan that had been announced, which I was aware of, even at that age, was that I was destined to go and do schooling, but in the Islamic schooling. I have an uncle was a very close cousin to my late father, very fond of him, who had trained to be a cleric, and he was in this business of running a school, almost a mobile school. He used to move away with his students across much of sub-region. Sometimes
Mhm.
he would told he's in Senegal, goes up to Mali and back, and he had got a promise from my father that
Mhm.
I was to go and join the school when it was felt I would be strong enough because it entailed a lot of trekking on foot. So I think it was said that it was considered that I needed a little bit more time to grow and to be strong enough to undertake that kind of thing. So it's happened that while waiting for that to happen, my father came under pressure from a different direction.
Mhm.
The chief of the district, them from battalion,
Mhm.
uh, you know, had of course got it fell to him as his duty to encourage parents to send their children to school. And my father happened to be not only family relative, but also a friend, and also so he appealed to him that as a as a prominent man in the community, he should set a good example. So
Mhm.
under pressure, he, he yielded and said I should be registered. But I don't think my father, I don't know, but I don't think he fully understood the implications, particularly in relation to the promise or the pledge he had given to his cousin. So
Mhm.
I just found myself in the school,
Mhm.
and fortunately, when my uncle turned up much later, several months or years later, well, at least a year later or so, and found what had he was faced with a new reality, he accepted. He was a very generous person. He accepted and said, "No, yes, that's okay. He should stay." So yes, I had my own. That's on my own side of that kind of
Yeah.
phenomenon.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was uh, not something that my family planned as such.
Mhm.
In fact, the standard scheme, which my in my family, the male members followed, because that was the case of many of my brothers who had.
Mhm.
I was perhaps the youngest but one of the male members, and all the others before me had to go through the scheme, which consists of from the age of say 10 or so, you go and look after the cattle because that's the major part of the little wealth that the family had. And much later, maybe around 18, 19, you shift to the actual agriculture, farming. So that was really the pattern it was set for me.
Mhm.
But I was number four among the male children of my father. And at the time these developments took place, the opening of the school and the pressure that came from the chief, I was just waiting for my turn to start running after the cattle, as it were. So yeah, that was my change in my life. I'm not sure whether um, uh, the pathway from which I was taken would have meant a better and happier life for me. I don't know. It never happened.
Yeah.
I happened
So
to be a Barabu.
so you ended up, entering into public service, and at a time when the country of the Gambia is still, building its institutions from independence. In fact, I think Bakary famously called it the birth of an improbable nation, just because of the unlikelihood of Gambia becoming a nation state then. So, what did it mean to you at the time to join the Gambian Civil Service in those early years after independence?
Well, yes, the Gambia approach of independence and even after independence had acute resource shortages, including trained manpower.
Mhm.
And this was particularly drawn on us. I mean, my class around 1963, 64. I was then in the sixth form. Uh,
So,
arranged,
Gambia High School?
yeah, planning to go to university. And I remember at that time, the one indication was a decision. It was unusual. It was unprecedented at that time. The colonial government, through the then education department, uh, told us in the sixth form, and the sixth form itself wasn't very big, that guaranteed us a scholarship to go in for the to go and study abroad for the studies, which was not was unprecedented because before then it would take time. You have to get your university entrance, but have to wait, and scholarships were made available on very small uh, numbers, and so it could take a couple of years or 3 years waiting. But in our own case, I remember before we actually wrote the uh, A-level result exams, we were told, and it was quite a motivation and incentive for us to say, well, if you work hard and get university entrance qualification, we guarantee you that we'll give you a scholarship for the course you want to take. Um, so yes, that was the kind of situation when. But and another time, of course, is natural. Apart from um, the absence of many other alternatives to for that kind of level of education, we were also impressed by the country's need for us to go and contribute. I say so because by the time I finished my first degree in Ibadan, there were other openings available to me, including going to academia, but that would have meant living abroad, studying abroad, and maybe living. But I chose really in between that option and going back to work in the Gambia. I chose to go to Gambia because I thought my country needed me, and everything was there to remind you of that. I remember even in the university schools, Gambia High School in particular, the principal came around to try to encourage some of us to go back to Gambia and when we qualified to go and teach. So that was everything telling you that there is need for you to go and work for your country. There was a dire need for trained manpower, many sectors. And that was really one of the things that weighed a lot in my decision to go and join this public service. But as I said, in honesty, also there weren't many other alternatives if you didn't want to go into the public service. There weren't many.
And it seems part of what I've read about you is even though when you were entering the public service, there were instances where you were based in the greater Gambia area, and there were times that you also were commissioned in the rural part of Gambia as well. And so I'm curious to also understand at this particular juncture, at very early years of your professional life, what were some of the administrative problems, if any, in terms of how our civil service looked like? But also to understand, because you hear a lot of this idea that, oh, Gambia at the time was widely admired in terms of the sort of civil service that we had. And people used to come to Gambia to study the system of civil service we had in a way to model it in different parts of the West African continent. Was this an accurate reflection, or are there systemic problems at the time that we're experiencing, uh, bearing in mind that we're still a very young nation state?
Well, yes, indeed. The Over time, the Gambian civil service acquired quite a strong reputation for its efficiency, its discipline, uh, basically. This is something that really developed over some time.
Mhm,
Initially, the system was simple but uh, strongly followed. You talked about uh, my experience in the provincial administration, regional administration, as
yes.
well as uh, in the headquarters.
Mhm,
This was almost a standard pathway for people who join the administrative service, administrative cadre, that's the elite, as it were, of
mhm,
the public service. You have to be, you have to do the regional administration because that gives you quite an idea about certain realities about of the Gambia, the country as a whole. And I had to go through it too. I served a term in Basse as an assistant to the commissioner, and later on I served as a term in Kerewan as commissioner. And you alternate that with working in the ministries, initially in the middle ranking level of managing ministries, sectors, and rising up depending on opportunities that there are for you to get promotion.
mhm.
This was the standard kind of uh, standard career path that was open to us. Well, I think we had the advantage not only of stability but of a civil service which followed a government policy of putting emphasis on professionalism and independence. The public service was jealously kept independent of political pressure. I'm not sure, I cannot say, of course, that it never happened, but it was very much kept to the barest minimum,
Mhm.
and professionalism was emphasized. So that with that kind of environment, within that kind of environment, and over time, the public we developed very capable cadre of civil servants, both in the administrative cadre, but also in some of the other professionals areas like medicine and education. And yes, it's true that several other development partners, over time, uh, noticed this and commended us on it. And I think there were even cases of one or two countries who did come to observe
Mhm.
the Gambia and sit test with a view to taking it as a model as they went.
Yeah.
It was something which was built over time, but it was fairly solid.
Okay.
I don't believe uh, in suggesting that it was faultless, or it was super extraordinarily good, but it was very good. It was very efficient.
Was working. So, before you became vice president of the Gambia, you served in several key capacities, including in diplomacy, but also ministerial roles as well. And those years coincided with important periods in shaping policy direction of the Fourth Republic. Now, serving as ambassador to Senegal placed you at the center of one of the most important bilateral relationships of the Gambia. What are the main diplomatic priorities at the time?
Well, yes, I agree that the most Senegal, Gambia, given the special relationship they had and special circumstances which put us together, represents, in terms of external relations, a key, a key country, and it was quite a challenge for me to be placed at a fairly young age as ambassador in Dakar. Also accredited to other neighboring countries, but mainly I'll talk about Gambian Senegal relations. It was a small mission we had, the Gambian diplomatic mission. I was the ambassador, and I had a couple of three or so diplomatic agents for supporting me. Apart from the normal consular work, which consisted of taking care of Gambians in Senegal or passing through. The other thing is to help in consolidating relationship between Gambia and Senegal through the cooperation that existed, because this was one of the was a fundamental option adopted by the two countries shortly after Gambia became independent. So where the two countries were bound by a whole series of technical cooperation agreements, trade agreements, and so on, and even in cultural and sports areas. So, as ambassador, you have a role in supporting that, because it's complementary to your traditional role of building relations within the two countries. So, I did quite a lot of that. The political part, it wasn't not much challenging as long as you um, did writing and report correctly, and don't do anything that will create difficulties in political relations with two countries. It's okay. I mean, and that was the other thing. I mean, it went on that rolled on pretty much on its own without much of a difficulty on our part.
Mhm.
So that was my major functions as a high commissioner in Dakar at the time. It didn't
You know,
last very long. I did only 3 years or 2.5 years. Then.
Your Excellency, I hate to be the person to save conversation so radically, but I think also it will be important bearing in mind your experience in diplomacy and also public service to bring the issue of the ongoing crisis in the Middle East to seek your perspective on that particular subject as well. And this is an existential question because for a legal person like yourself, and to a little less extent myself, international human rights law and international humanitarian law and generally international law has been a bedrock for how states engage among themselves and how we protect the sanctity of human life. And so I'm curious to really ask you, based off what you've seen so far, um, what we're experiencing in terms of how power is shifting, how the dynamics of relationship of countries are also shifting, the positionality of African continent, including the Gambia, because what happens in some of those places directly affects us, and we've seen this with the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. What is your observation of what is happening currently, and how does this relate directly to African continent, including countries as small as the Gambia?
Well, I would rather talk from the point of view of my own personal belief in these matters because the perspective of Gambia's government state policy that I would not want to pronounce on. I think that's
Yeah.
for you and I to observe from outside and see how it plays out. I believe I'm pretty much of an uh, a believer in the orthodoxy of rule-based world order which is based on certain rules which we have agreed on. This has been the experience from the First World War, when at the end of the war, the countries, the nation states then agreed on the League of Nations as a way of trying to insist that there should be an order which will regulate relations between countries on a global stage. And when the League of Nations didn't perform very well to that level, at least it didn't prevent the Second World War, the United Nations came in as an improvement on that, but emphasizing pretty much this idea of international law founded on the basis of rules which have been agreed to. And in terms of uh, that idea of approach of handling international relations, I must say that what is happening right now in the Middle East is I find it's a bit not a bit quite disturbing because it doesn't seem to conform pretty much to that idea of rule of law in the sense that um, you have a dispute if you look at the Middle East as a whole between over Palestine and Israel, and this has been there have been several key uh, UN Security Council resolutions, which over the years have not been implemented satisfactorily, and the disputes on the crisis continued, and now it has bloomed into a larger area involving even Iran. Now, the quarrel with Iran, we must remember, initially was over uh, nuclear nuclear threat,
Mhm.
in the sense that, in terms of the nuclear treaty which the United Nations got put in place,
JC,
banning
JCPOA. Mhm.
yeah, UN banning countries that had not as at that time
Okay.
not got to develop it. Now it is normal that the United Nations should really try to do everything to discourage Iran, just like any other countries who want to breach that nuclear treaty, to put pressure on them, but through peaceful dialogue, discussions. Use of force is pretty difficult. It's quite difficult. Now, that is really the initial uh, issue with Iran. But latterly, of course, you do hear about other things. You hear about uh, uh, regime change. They want to change the regime. You even hear about um, threat to uh, threat to uh, threat to the world, as it were. Because I
Yes.
said the example of Israel, but the idea is that if it's Israel today is going to be tomorrow. Now, that is the added issue that has come in to complicate matters. And but be that as it may,
Mhm.
the orthodox practitioner of diplomacy that I am, I believe that we should still continue the process, because that process, process of dialogue, it has yielded results. You know, in the time of I think Obama also, yes, yes, with
Mhm.
Obama, they had agreed on a certain number of measures restraining Iran from going forward, certain commitments. So
Mhm.
it's really try to through an incremental process, build on that through the negotiations and not use force. This is my own personal view.
Opinion.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, recent developments, particularly in the Middle East, showing that, well, it seems to be that that is not the path which is being taken, and uh, certain countries feel that if in their judgments there is a threat to their national interest or to global peace, as they say it, they feel they should feel free and proceed. And that leaves the United Nations, it leaves the question as well, what is the point about the United Nations? What's the point about it? In other
Yeah.
words, as I said, the rule-based order is no longer what seems to be holding. It
Yeah.
seems to be, or at least if it's a rule based, it is rule based as interpreted by some people. So yeah,
Yeah. In fact, one could also make the case that it's rule for a certain group of nations, and there's a whole different,
yeah, yeah.
system for the rest of the world.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so,
You ask also really what that means for small states. Yes, and I think for small states like the Gambia, apart from the the, the principle, the strong principle behind it. There is self-interest because we know we have because we are small and vulnerable.
mhm,
We can only feel secure where we have predictable rules that will govern the world order. You know, of course, we feel very worried now. If it's possible for powerful states, given whatever reasons they believe, they can go and actually capture your president today and tomorrow put him in jail in New York. It's not easy. It's not the
yeah,
easiest thing. It's not the best ideal world in which small countries like Gambia can live and feel safe.
mhm,
But anyway, this is unfortunately the nature of diplomacy.
yeah,
Even in the old days, you have sometimes had what you call gunboat diplomacy. You know, when issues that are not to solve by dialogue, some countries have not been able to resist the temptation to use force.
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
usually what things are like.
So, Honorable, looking back at your ministerial roles, the various ones that you've held during your time, what achievements would you say that, or at least remain so underappreciated, that perhaps the same way that you've talked about just how the civil service was at the time, and how efficient it was in terms of how it was functioning, what would you say are some of the achievements that you personally and also during your time in those ministerial roles that you've accomplished that today is so highly underappreciated?
Well, achievements, yes, I will take the word achievement in the sense of developments that took place
Mhm.
while one happened to be around.
Yes,
It's,
yes,
it's not going to be uh, elegant to claim it as a personal thing. You know,
yes.
a few things did happen over the period that I was in the government
Mhm,
that I can think of. Say the civil service, for instance.
mhm,
What is not quite uh, reported by commentaries I see about myself and my career is that
mhm,
people overlook the point that I had been Minister for the Civil Service for 10 years, from 1982 to 1992. As
mhm.
Vice President, I had a few portfolios attached to me. It was an arrangement that came into force in 1992. Before 1992, the civil service as a ministerial portfolio was held by the president. But I remember in 1982, when I became vice president, he gave me the civil service. And the civil service is one of those sectors which, over this period that I was there, did undergo considerable reforms. You remember or you might know of the extensive economic reforms we embarked on around
Yes.
1984, 85, 86, 87. A very big component of that, which is less talked about, was what we call the administrative reform program. There was the economic reform program, but there was also the administrative reform program to make to look at the civil service, turn it to what we used to call a leaner and meaner, meaner machinery for delivering public services, and that administrative reform program was what brought about quite advancement in the approach to professional approach to running the civil service as opposed to what happened in the past. It was symbolized by the transformation of what used to be called a small establishment office, which was really, as the name implied, was really dealt with keeping personnel records, into a personnel management office, which tried to understand and teach new and modern techniques of managing public service, uh, service-wide, and through more scientific way of assessing, evaluation, and training. And that was really one major reform which took place uh, during the time that I was in the government, and particularly at the time that I was the minister responsible for that sector. There are other sectors also. I don't like to talk about uh, them as achievements, personal achievements, but I should say there are developments that took place while I was around, and I'm happy. I feel happy about them. One has been also in the area of education. Again, another uh, portfolio which was given to me between from 1987 to 1992. I took over that portfolio, which then went along with other sectors like culture, sport, youth and sports. But in education specifically, it was a sector that had been in crisis for a long time
Mhm.
before I took over. A very serious crisis, largely due to underfunding. Because the new nationalist government after 1965 rightly gave emphasis to uh, democratizing educational opportunities. Today, you do hear some criticisms. I think most of them very unfair. Like the government didn't do much for education, but that is not borne out by the reality. I mean, if you knew what obtained at independence and over the period up to when I became Minister of Education, a lot has changed in expanding opportunities and rising. But of course, this was not followed up with the resource that was needed. So a lot of what was going on was pretty difficult. And
Mhm.
the personnel, the teaching force, for instance, was in a terrible spirit of disillusionment, even, very demoralized. So part of my contribution has been that during that period of 5 years, I think a lot has been done
Mhm.
to through securing increased funding
Mhm.
to attend to most of those critical needs
Mhm.
of the sector, and it led to considerable improvement in output. You know,
Mhm.
the transition stage, which was one of the indices we used, the transition from primary to secondary jumped considerably from about 34% to almost 50 something percent by the time I left that ministry.
Mhm.
Uh, and this was also a development, which you can call it an achievement, but it was, I would more modestly call it development, which took place while I was there. And I'm very happy about it. I can say a bit about other sectors, but my main job, of course, as vice president was as assistant to the president. In our system, the vice president was uh, mainly an assistant to the president, uh, who got involved in a lot of coordination work, depending on how much the president asked him to do. On occasions, in the absence of the president, even steps in to carry out most of the functions that devolve onto the president. So, in that regard, well, I can feel proud, not so much seeing them as achievements, but I can feel proud that for the not only the tenure lasted 10 years, but during that time, I think I gave my best, and I did give, I think, what is generally agreed to be a reasonable, solid support to the president, my principal. That was my main job, to give
Mhm.
support and assist him. I tried my very best in that regard.
And this could be a larger question, but I'll try to narrow it down. If you look at that time, that period that you are in as vice president and also in some ministerial positions as well, are there anything that you would consider that perhaps that you could have or the system could have done better in terms of the government that you were serving? Because it's hard to look at a career as long as that and say, oh, what have you done wrong? But suddenly I'm sure looking back you're like, we could perhaps do one or two or three things better as a government together. Are there anything as such that you could look back on and say that we had this perennial or perhaps very long problem that we are unable to address, that we could have done one, two, or three to do better in this respect? Were there anything that you've learned over the years to see that perhaps that areas that your government could have improved on?
Well, in terms of policy posture, I think, because I'm not the best place to pass judgment, but I had the impression that for most part, we got it right. We got the
Okay.
right policy postures. In terms of implementation operations on the ground, yes, we might, in some instances, fail to attain objectives that we set out to achieve. But quite often, those are not uh, proof or indication that the policies were wrong in the services. A lot of things can go wrong
Mhm.
in operations. Sometimes it's resources are not to the level that are required. Sometimes it's a human factor. The management, might also not be up to what you expected. So there have been instances where we haven't really achieved our target. But in terms of the decision to on the way, the vision, I think we are broadly speaking on the right track. Broadly speaking, this is also confirmed not only by the results we achieved, but also by the views of a number of partners we worked with, who would have no interest in telling us we are doing things rightly if we are not doing them rightly. So I think on the whole, it was not a perfect, and it was not 100% successful. There were a lot of misses here and there,
Okay.
but they were not due to wrong policies. For the most part, they were not wrong due to the wrong policies, because the fundamental policies of trying to build uh, solid institutional pillars for the state, which was the main challenge of a new government, a new country, a country just emerging into independence. That was pursued with a lot of seriousness and diligence, and it yielded results. If you consider how the judiciary, for instance, was allowed freedom and given every possible encouragement. They would, of course, say they didn't have enough resources, but that's reflecting the overall situation of the country. But the judiciary was allowed to operate freely and independently, and with a lot of benefits to developing the country, not only for the ordinary, for the people of the country, but also in terms of our investment ambitions, because investors, these are some of the things they look at, the investment climate. If you look at even at Parliament also, Initially, through perhaps not getting the right level of trained uh, people in parliament, but over time, through practice and through training, a parliament became quite effective in the whole system. It was again a situation which the ruling party for a long time had quite a majority in parliament, but it didn't stop parliament from performing quite effectively in its oversight role in the context of the rule, the laws that are obtained. And that also went for the civil service. I told you, institutions like civil service
Mhm.
was was given every encouragement, but also left independent to be sheltered from undue pressure on political manipulation. So, both basically, those are some of the fundamental policies we pursued, and I think they were right in terms of foreign relations. Also, we pursued a small country, we pursued sensible and responsible policy, whereby we chose our, we chose our friends very judiciously and worked closely with them. But at the level of the United Nations as well as the regional bodies, we were a responsible member who stood in defense of sensible policies rather than going to uh, you know childish jumping about, running into issues that have really no interest, and
Yeah.
that led to the respectability that the country
Yes.
had as a member of the International Committee of Nations. The country became very much respected for its position, usually well reasoned, well principled, and we went by it. One example was Taiwan
Mhm.
and mainland China. At independence, Gambia established relations with Taiwan at the time,
Mhm.
because mainland China was, anyway, that was the kind of thinking. But later on, with the admission by the United Nations of one and only one China, the principle that China was one,
Yes.
and mainland China was recognized, that became the international law, and there's a responsible position. And Gambia was among the countries that we switched to mainland China, and we came under considerable pressure, because Taiwan adopted this, what they was referred to as the checkbook diplomacy.
Mhm.
You hardly at the time, as a senior minister, travel without some Chinese lobbies, I mean Taiwanese lobbies, finding you in your hotel saying, if your country will swift switch to ours, and we'll give you this kind of money. But we thought that, look, we have to be responsible members of the international community. As a small country, we have to be on the side of rule-based international order. If
Mhm.
international, if the United Nations has accepted that China is one and indivisible, Gambia cannot take a policy that goes flies in the face of that.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of diplomacy, the way we conducted our relations with foreign countries. Similarly, African unity, also the same thing.
Mhm.
And we picked on also on issues which are then coming up, not all that popular, but still, like human rights,
Mhm.
respect for human rights. When it became clear that this has become a very uh, serious issue, particularly even in Africa. Our government was one of the few African countries, governments at the time, that took it a very strong stand at the level of the Commonwealth, but also at the level of the AU, leading to the founding of the AU Commission on Human and People's Rights. Even
Mhm.
the very name, human and people's rights, was a kind of concession, a compromise we had to make, because at the time the idea wasn't that popular in South Africa, and some argued that we should talk more about people's rights and not instead of human rights. It was a compromise that we decided to call it human and people's rights. But the
Right.
main point really was to take up human rights protection and promotion as an
Mhm.
essential part of responsibility of states,
Mhm.
all states. And there was a kind of contribution Gambia made to world governance as well
Mhm.
as governance at the level of the individual countries.
Honorable, would you perhaps then say that, given all of these achievements, and I must say also some of the shortcomings or areas that you could have done better, would you say that there is an ongoing historical revisionism in terms of how people look at your tenure and the tenure of your government in the Gambia? Because you listen to a lot of people, I mean, especially for young people like us, sometimes it's hard to say which facts are objective and which ones are subjective, because people have their ways of analyzing the Jawara government. But would you say that there is almost I mean, an intention to downplay, because government is a continuous process. One government comes and they leave, and then other people also come continue. But in our instance, there is almost constantly the issue of trying to diminish or downplay the achievements or accomplishments of the previous ones.
Yeah, well, in that case, really, we were just unfortunate as a country in that we had to live in a situation which was not of our choice. It's the imposition of usurpers of power, the people who use violence to usurp power, and they had to justify themselves. To justify themselves, they had to really, really, invent and harp on these points that the government that was there was not doing enough, has not done this, has not done that, to the point that it was a sustained
Mhm,
22 years or 23 years of sustained vilification using all state media. Small as it may be, just imagine having state media for 25 years or 22 years. I mean, who would even mention the name of the PPP government or PPP personalities without deliberately giving them, demonizing them.
mhm,
Just imagine at the level of the young generation going through the school. That's the only thing they were hearing. That's the only thing. It got to a point that it was an offense. I was not in the country, but I knew about it. It was considered an offense in a school to say anything positive about the PPP government. This was a government policy. It's a really, really cynical. It's the height of cynicism. Just go out full. I remember the
ultra good.
the 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 the, I don't know. I don't even remember. I need to go on all those years. But it was a sustained campaign, government policy of vilification, vilify the PPP government, everything, distort, no unscrupulously distort things unscrupulously, even say things that are like, and over time, of course, that leads particularly the young generation who grew up with that, with the
Mhm,
impression that no, not nothing was being done or nothing right was being done. And so that's sad. That's why I say we are unfortunate because that was a situation we couldn't handle. I mean, we didn't have a strong independent media who were even left free to try to project another version or give chance to others to speak. The government, it was a dictatorship, terrible dictatorship. So really, it's just unfortunate. It's just unfortunate. And I myself, even at my personal level, I do come across it. Traveling in the Gambia, I do come across young people who innocently, reveal that this is the view we had about it.
mhm.
It was so rubbish. I mean, can you imagine the Radio Gambia for 22 years never had anything, nothing about it. It's so sad. It's extremely sad. Last time I watched, not last time, a few years ago, I saw in an African country, similar African country, and on the occasion of their one of their national days, I think it's their National Day or Army Day, and the president decided to sort of dedicated the occasion to the memories of the previous governments. That's not
Mhm,
only uh, the elegant thing to do, the decent thing to do, but it's also proved extremely edifying because the younger generation began to hear about in a different light from the
yeah.
way from the one that was projected. In the case of the Gambia, that was not only impossible, but there was direct, positive use of the media to demonize the Gambia. A
Yeah.
lot of that goes on. It's one of those things.
Yeah.
We just take comfort in the hope that history will get it right as time
Yes.
goes. Yeah. For now,
Yeah.
emotions are high, but as the dust settles down, perhaps the correct history will be already. There are several objective accounts or
Yeah.
observers
I.
and others give it,
Mhm.
but it will be given more amplified as time goes by.
Uh, yeah, I hosted the historian Hasum Sise 2 weeks ago, and really he echoed exactly some of the sentiments that you were sharing in terms of his assessment of the PPP government, especially in respect to the perception or the existing allegations of corruption in the PPP government. And it was wonderful conversation that we had. But for those of you joining us, my guest today is former Vice President of the Gambia and party leader of Gambia for All. There's a lot of people watching on YouTube and also on Facebook. I would like to say thank you to all of you for being here. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel. Also, His Excellency is the party leader for Gambia for All. Like I said, their party, I'm sure they have their Facebook pages and social media accounts. Please check them out if you want to get engaged or get involved with them. Once again, thank you all very much. But we are going to move on to another important subject that the Honorable Vice President has a lot of knowledge and experience on, which is the 1981 coup attempt and the Senegambia Confederation. One of the defining moments of the Fourth Republic was the 1981 coup attempt that and the events that followed. The crisis ultimately led to the creation of the Senegambia Confederation, or major political experiment in regional integration. Talk to us about your immediate understanding of the crisis when the 1981 coup attempt unfolded.
What was my understanding?
Yes,
Was
your
it,
understanding of the crisis when the 1981 coup unfolded.
well, initially, I saw it as a very serious attempt to change the constitutional order, illegal, violent, through violence, and it didn't. Well, I had not foreseen it, but it wasn't also uh, totally unimagined, because it was preceded by the 81 coup attempt was preceded by certain developments which were quite unfortunate, which threatened the stability of the country. I remember I referred to an incident in 1980 when there was an incident in which it turned out later on, I think upon investigation, they found, but at the time we didn't know much about it. The security outfit called the field force soldiers shot somebody, and and there had been also some attempts, some subversive activities going on at the time, and we knew that we could be vulnerable to some attempts to destabilize us. So when I had the announcement, I had that particular announcement myself on the radio. I was based in Dakar, and it was part of my routine to listen to the 7 o'clock or so Gambia news.
Mhm.
So I heard it myself for myself. Nobody told me. I heard that the announcement made, which was that the the government was being overthrown by people who claimed that they were, I think they call themselves revolutionary, some kind of whatever it is, a lot of rhetoric. Now, so I had little doubt as to the
Mhm.
gravity, seriousness of it, and as to what I could do was to first to remember how much solution to the threats
Mhm.
uh, could be found in our relations with Senegal, which was my responsibility. And I had known that because before as foreign service officer before I became ambassador. I was at one time in the Senegambia Permanent Secretariat responsible for the operationalization of Senegambia cooperation. One of the key pillars was the defense agreement, which had been signed as early as 1967 or so, shortly after independence, which for the two countries to help each other in the event of threats, externally generated threats, that kind of thing was going on. It's also the case that before the run-up, in the years running up to, as I said, both Gambia and Senegal were very much the subject of attempts to subvert. I recall President Senghor, when he received my letters of credence, the very day I presented my letters of credence, and he took you, as it was his practice, he took you into his office for a chat. One of the first things he told me, tell Dauda that he should be careful about Gaddafi. He said, Dauda, you should be careful about Gaddafi. Yeah, because by then, Senegal had actually broken relations with Gaddafi. Gambia,
Wow.
we had some instances, but we hadn't quite yet. I remember that was in 79 when by the time I was, Gambia hadn't broken up, but subsequently, certainly after we broke relations with it. But there was this, it was no secret. There was a lot of attempts we knew of that subversion. So when the announcement came in, well, as I said, it fell in pattern with what the fears we had, and particularly when there were a lot of reports coming at the time, which suggested that really the origin of the attempt was foreign. You nowadays, of course, after with hindsight, we see some of them perhaps were not quite exact, but that was, for instance, the the Soviet-made Lada vehicles, which were very much inside. The morning they could apparently some local car dealer had imported a lot of them, and one of the first shops they broke into. So people, all those were put together. So at the time, really, the feeling, the impression, the conviction I had, which was also shared by my principals and also by Senegal, was that no, this is a lot of there's a foreign this thing going in, and of course later on even the facts became clear that the insurrection was led by a man who was in that morning busy trying to call Gaddafi. He went to any place you thought he could get a number for Gaddafi. So really that was the way it was perceived. Really, on the basis of a lot of things, including reports we have been getting before. And so therefore I remembered that our defense agreement with Senegal could perhaps become relevant in a situation like this. And when I got instructions, um, first difficulty was to contact my principals. The president was at the time on that day in UK, and the the vice president, who was head of the government team, was not immediately accessible for me by telephone. Telephones were difficult anyway, but I tried and couldn't get him until I was trying both Sadauda and Hassan Musa. Finally, I got Sadauda, and he told me yes, he had heard from Hassan Musa, but the line went dead even before they could, or at least he got the main thing. So from that point now, I became the medium, because easier for Sadauda to talk to me, and I was difficult as it was. I managed finally to get to Hassan Musa through different other people. So that became my role, and I got instructions that we should formally invoke the defense agreements and ask for Senegalese intervention. The formal notification was made by Hassan Musa himself to the Senegalese ambassador in Dakar, in Banjul, but I was at the same time being on the spot, working closely with the foreign minister then, the Senegalese foreign minister, responsible for relaying the same message to the Senegalese authorities, and then work on arrangements. So that was how I saw it, and what I saw the first initial steps I
Yeah.
could take. It was all part of my job, my responsibility as ambassador.
But that must be a profoundly enduring experience, knowing fully well that this could have the potential to plunge the country into complete chaos, which it has. And I mean, I think still people debate between the number of people or casualties that fell prey or victims to that 1981 coup d'état. And
Yeah.
Hasum Sise asked this prominent question, and I'm going to ask you. He said, until today, he doesn't understand, or he has continued to ask the question as to why Kukoi armed civilians. Do you have any knowledge or any understanding at all whether you know why or have an answer as to why Kukoi armed civilians?
No, I don't know, but I mean, Kuko is the whole thing was such uh, a ragtag thing. I mean, himself was not a military; he was a civilian, and his revolutionary council itself already almost all of them were civilians. And second thing also is that very soon after they made the announcement, they lost control over things. The the civilians they didn't have full control over the weaponry, the weapons in Fajara. So some civilians, some young people out of adventure got into. Then later in the day, or maybe the following day, I think later in the day when it became clear to them that Senegal might intervene, then of course they made an appeal on the radio. Kuko and Israel made an appeal to the public to say, come forward and take weapons. So I think if I'm to guess why weapons found themselves in the hands of the civilians, this was the situation. At first, the control was not effective, so some people help themselves without even fully understanding what they were going to fight for. But secondly, there was an actual appeal, and some people, some young people, not many, but some fell for it and therefore went to collect weapons. Yeah, I think that's really what I would be my guess. But Kuko's mind. Who could understand Kuko's mind? So,
Yes. So, what was the overarching goal of creating the Senegambia Confederation?
well, it was not done out of the blue. It was also uh, a development on a process that had been in place, informed by experience, recent experience. You know, the approach of when it became clear that Britain was seriously considering giving independence to Gambia, the issue of Gambia's relationship with Senegal became very much uh, hot topic for discussion,
Mhm.
and the United Nations was approached by British government and Senegal to undertake a study, technical study, to identify possible options which the two countries can examine in terms of settling for the kind of relationship they would have. One of them was, in fact, complete fusion from the word go. Another one was federation, and the third one was even looser embrace in the context of what is called the Senegambian. Uh, I think the term used was uh, Senegambian. It was not. It was the most loosest,
Okay,
uh,
so loose time. Okay.
and it was one which will leave the two countries independent as
Mhm.
independent states, but they will bind themselves to active cooperation in certain areas.
Okay.
Critical among them will be defense,
Mhm.
security and defense. Another one is foreign affairs, and also others. So really, right from the word go, the idea of Gambia and Senegal linking up in areas like defense would be, was agreed as a matter of principle. It's a question of really what level of embrace.
Mhm.
And that was what obtained. So when it served us in in legitimizing and justifying the Senegalese intervention coming in the
Mhm.
light of reviewing the experience, it was felt that if we can have a confederation, which is a tighter
Mhm.
embrace, not up to a federation, but tighter than the earlier one. The Senegalo-Gambian Association Treaty. It was the earlier one was called Association.
Okay.
Now with a confederation, which is a step further,
Mhm.
and this was agreed. And immediately, actually, it was. I can tell you, as somebody who was around, it was not the Senegalese who insisted on as a condition. To be quite
Mhm.
honest, if they wanted it, they didn't express it, they didn't verbalize it.
Mhm.
It was the first meeting we had after the coup was put down and Sadauda came back to Dakar, primarily to visit Gambian and Senegalese soldiers who had been wounded and were in hospital and to express condolences, but also in the margin of it to have a meeting with the
Mhm.
Senegalese. It was at that stage that when the idea of how do we even enhance the Senegalo-Gambian cooperation, that Sadauda suggested that we can even think of a confederation, which is an arrangement a little much closer than the loose association we had,
Mhm.
and that was how it came about. Well, only the Senegalese side also said no objection. They
It seems we have a little Okay, he's back. Okay, welcome back. Please, sorry about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. From agreeing on the principle, the matter was then left to the two sides through their experts to hammer out the architecture of
Mhm.
the of the arrangement, and that's how the confederation came about through legislation in both countries, and then it was yeah.
So it was until 1994, military coup d'etat led by Yahya Ejije Jammeh and his junta members. Gambia was experiencing the longest constitutional democracy. I think arguably the longest constitutional democracy in I think West Africa or Africa at the time, but you can correct me on that. And so it would appear again that you'll have another experience with military takeover, this time 1994, after the 1981 one. What was your immediate reaction when the news of the coup reached you? And at the time, before the coup actually happened by Jambia and his colleagues, what was Gambia in fact really in terms of, because Africa was grappling with a lot of military takeovers at this particular moment of our political history, and Gambia until 1981, with the very brief interruption, were still a constitutional democracy until the Senegalese intervention came and maintained the status quo. What is your experience?
Well, it came as a quite a surprise,
Mhm.
I must say. True, if you look at the regional and the sub-regional environment, yes, there were some coups continued.
Mhm.
Maybe it was in the worst time, but there were some regimes. There was a military government in Ghana, in Nigeria, and also in Sierra Leone. But we still thought that the Gambia, for its is not likely to go down that way. About a year before, I think in 1993,
Mhm.
when well, the government, through government bill, we abolished the death sentence in our laws, in our statute. I remember the debates was very extensive, both at the party level of the party and later on in parliament. There were some people who say, ah, no, 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 it's Africa, let's have it there. It could serve as a deterrent.
Mhm.
And I remember those, and I happen to be on the side of those who argued for it. They said, look, not only is it not effective as a deterrent from the experience of other countries, but we believe that really there is a minimum of justification that soldiers perhaps look for to stage a coup. And in our own case, it was not the political system which was in any way oppressive.
Mhm.
There was democracy. There was the rule of law was respected. The judiciary was there. There was no much. not injustice in any area that one could really point your finger at. Seriously speaking, the economy had gone through serious difficulties, but at that particular time, it had started to come out. We had done so well with the economic reform program that we went to the next phase of what we call the program for sustainable development, how to sustain the achievement. So really, we didn't think that was. I personally didn't think that there was a case for changing the government by any rational people. Unfortunately, I think we didn't have many rational people in the army at the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it came to me as a big surprise, and to many
Yeah.
people, it came as a surprise. We didn't. Well, there would be local sector issues like the army had some people in the army had complained. Maybe they thought their career prospects were frustrated by the fact that Nigerian technical systems personnel were in the but this is very much a local. You never, well, I personally never thought and never hoped any government that would use as excuse for such a huge and a disastrous step to topple the constitutional order of a country. I mean,
Hmm.
how, I never thought that people would think along those lines. But that's how it was seen. It was a surprise. Hindsight, people can say a lot of things. It was because we set up the army and all that, but we had also thought, oh, we had tried. At least I was a member of the cabinet, and I know that at the cabinet level, the Ministry of Defense, which had been consistently the portfolio of the president, he had tried to run it as best as he could. In the military, what support we could sustain with our resource level, but also insist on good training, that they should be trained and hopefully they should be. Of course, he had to rely on the army leadership to do the recruitment and the training. Now, the human element comes in. Maybe there were failures in that regard because uh, people will tell you that some elements
Hmm.
really had no place. I mean, I had somebody, a soldier, recently was saying that the when Jame was, I think he was part of the Confederation, Confederal forces or so, his supervisors were even pressing for him to be sacked. But so,
Yeah.
as they do in the Gambia, they say, oh, well, say they never. And he had
Yeah.
been, I think he had many disciplinary
Issues. Yeah.
cases
Mhm.
throughout his career. So those
Yeah.
are things that unfortunately don't reflect on the policy as such. It is just that the management, the leadership was not up to scratch. But I didn't think it affected the overall soundness of the policy of creating our army, our own army. Because remember that in 1981, what happened was made easy because there was not an army in the traditional sense of the word. We had a
Yes.
paramilitary,
Hmm.
which in terms of discipline and training was not the right response to our security needs.
So, you serve in this really profoundly important democratic government that many credits for how it was able to solidify rule of law in the Gambia. And then after the change in 1994, you also, I think, had a brief stint with the military government. Or I think perhaps after, yeah, you had a brief stint with the military government as well. So, how did you come to the decision to stay on, and then how did your resignation come about? Because I think that came as a shock to most people, as to how you were able to serve in Jara's government, and then when after the military take over, you also stick around in the new government as well.
Yeah, well, at the personal level, my relations with the military junta, it went through quite an evolution up and down.
Mhm. Mhm.
Initially, having found myself in Dakar and outside their control,
Mhm.
my position was that we should try to do everything possible to undo the coup. So, and I was very thick in the middle of attempts. I don't need to go into all those details to secure assistance to undo the coup. And I played my part in that as much as I could. A key area of hope then was ECOWAS. It hadn't taken a very strong position on governance in member states, but at least it was already uh, an area where they paid some attention to. I remember even earlier cases there was when Sergeant Doe took over in uh, in Liberia. ECHO was through President Sagari at the time, tried very much to discourage it. But anyway, somehow it governed the ECOWAS as a body hadn't come to a very strong position, but they were not encouraging it.
Mhm.
So among the different doors we knocked on was the ECOWAS, and and we were hopeful. The first few days we were hopeful that something was going to be done because it was so blatant,
Mhm.
and the key player and the chair and the key player in ECOWAS in terms of resources that will need to be mobilized was Nigeria. And Nigeria was the government at the time at the initial first what's it called the first few days or weeks sounded very much in sympathy with the need to remove it. Remember that Abacha, who was then the head of, had sent his own well, he himself took part in selecting the head, the person who was to come and take over the headship of the Nigerian team.
Mhm.
Gwadabe. Gwadabe had been to Banjul, officially took over, but then had to go back to Nigeria to pack and come. So in a
Mhm.
way, Abacha I think also felt offended. Felt offended. It's a slap to him. So he was quite keen. Somehow the hope didn't uh, it wasn't realized because I think to a very large extent it was Rawlings
Mhm.
who torpedoed it. He happened to be at the time in the sitting chairman of ECOWAS, and he came with this idea, which shouldn't surprise us given his own background as a two-time coup maker.
Mhm.
He wasn't very bothered. In fact, I think people like him at the time were always constantly reminded of the embarrassment of having small Gambia of maintaining democratic, civilized governance.
Mhm.
So I think he felt a bit unhappy. I think that's my fear, because he came with this idea that when Abacha approached him, well, let's have a meeting, and he started, and then came with the ridiculous suggestion that he wanted to find out whether the coup had popular supporting. Now,
Mhm.
how do you vote in a coup? It's a nonsensical thing. He said that his foreign minister and Abacha's foreign minister and Strasser's foreign minister. It was a time when the English-speaking countries were all under military, not only military, but military, worst type of military government. Because I have seen, having lived in West Africa, I've seen some military government, a bit serious. So
Mhm.
this particular time in our history, we had Rawlings in Ghana, we had Abacha there, and we had
Yeah.
what do you call it again, Strasser.
Mhm.
They had this their foreign ministers came, and I don't know whoever they saw, they went back and said to Rawlings that, oh no, it's a popular government. And within a matter of a month or so, Rawlings himself was down in Banjul,
Mhm.
with his fatigue, saying, addressing this, so I said, call you are warriors, call it,
Mhm.
encouraging them literally, and he
Yeah.
undermines. And Abacha didn't. Abacha went along,
Mhm.
but only after a short while, Abacha also needed political support
Mhm.
at a time when he was extremely
Mhm.
isolated diplomatically, particularly over the hanging of Sarawiwa. They had
Mhm.
the Commonwealth Summit. Those days, it was few weeks after he took over or something like that, and it took place
Mhm.
in Auckland, in New Zealand. And led by Mandela, there was a whole campaign to really have nothing to do with Abacha, boycott him, and he was kicked out of the Commonwealth. But Gambia was the only country, Gambia was the only country that went to. Even even Rawlings didn't. Rawlings went
Wow.
there, he didn't say anything. He kept quiet. Strasser pretended that he lost his flight or so. He went to do but he never went. He
Hmm.
said it was Jaime Center, his foreign minister, who went, and he was the only one saying, yes, we defend Abacha against for the horrendous things he was doing in
Hmm.
human. So, that's how, that what brought about the rapprochement between Abacha and Jame. Abacha found in Jame a little ally who can be a small errand boy for him doing all this mess. And Abacha, Jame needed him not only for
Hmm.
protection but also get the resources. It was said during those years that almost every week Jame or his wife will be going to Abuja to collect a
Yeah.
bit of so that was unfortunately the situation about situation of the country. We
Hmm.
had the coup given as a surprise, but all attempts to get the ECOWAS Commonwealth, they are not, they weren't placed in a position to be effective on the ground. What they could do, they did
Hmm.
issue strong sanctions. EU's also strong sanctions, but that's why they could stop. But the
Hmm.
ones who could put, they say, boots on the ground were the ECOWAS. They had the capacity, but Rawlings undermined everything.
Hmm. Yeah.
So we're in that kind of situation. And then, as I said, my relations, my personal, it has ups and downs. From
Roller
that
coaster.
moment, it became
Hmm.
that we really we had to live with this reality and or think
Hmm.
of another way of
Yeah.
either sort circuiting it or you know sort of reduce the harm that could be done. And it's against that background that when I was
Hmm.
approached by by they themselves in many different ways,
Hmm.
I said, "Well, you come. You are an honest man. You have not done anything." Because I knew that even the others hadn't done anything to warrant the coup d'état. But still,
Yeah.
in that desperate situation,
Hmm.
where I felt very strongly that our country was in serious danger
Hmm.
under military rule. I had observed and lived in West Africa. I had seen the kind of damage that could be done, and I knew how vulnerable the Gambia was. I
Hmm.
thought that, well, look, if for what it could deliver by way of an opportunity to at least, you know, uh, reduce the period which with this people will stay in power and live and lead to the restoration of constitutional order is worth it. And that
Yeah.
was on that basis that I accepted to come down from Dakar. I was under no extreme pressure. In fact, I had, in terms of friends and other advisors, I had a lot of people. Some encouraged me strongly, "Come, please come," but others told me the danger to my person, going to
Hmm.
be. I knew it, and I knew I consciously took that risk. I said, "Yes, I'll do it," out of my feeling, my fear
Hmm.
for my country. I said, "I'll come and give my help." Now,
Hmm.
of course, it was a bargaining between two forces that are not of equal power. When you come in, you start with them. Yes, we agreed on certain ground rules. One is that they would have to accept, while I'll have to accept that, yes, the change of order has taken place, but it will be kept to the shortest possible
Hmm.
damage by keeping it to the shortest possible. And this was,
Transition.
and that certain basic achievements would not be overturned. One of them was, I remember, independent professional civil service, because I recall by the time I came down, they had already started sacking commissioners and sending legals, and I observed that was the wrong way to go. Why should it be?
Hmm.
So I thought some of the key achievements, the economic policy, which was delivering goods, and the system of civil service should be left in place as much as possible. It is stand in their way. They got well. Initially, they promised, but they never kept to that promise, and that was why precisely within um, within, I left 70 days, 2 months and 10 days, because
10 days,
yes, I
yeah.
had yes, I had emphasized that this period should be kept to the barest minimum, and I had
Mhm.
the help of our development partners, both the EU and the UN and the World Bank, were insisting that yes, there should be a commitment to return the country to independence within the shortest possible time.
Mhm.
And every time Jame played little hanky panky, we'll go to him. Remember when he first visited Dakar, he said to journalists, I think it was whether he was meant to a slip of tongue, or he said he would be the regime. He could see the regime being in power for 4 years, 4 years speaking in English. And when
Mhm.
the the media reported that this military boy said 4 years, because earlier on he had been saying no, we're going to only for a short one. The way he said
Mhm.
4 years, he told that I said no, I didn't say 4 years FOUR, I meant 4 years FOR. It was clear from the early that look, these people are not men of their word.
Mhm.
They may be soldiers with a difference, but they are not men of their word.
Yeah.
And that was why within a very short time, I it came the incident. I can't even tell you the incident. I mean,
Yeah.
I said, look, I had even given you a word, but it's not enough. This has to be expressed in a programmatic way. You have to produce a program, an agenda that you want to carry out, and
Mhm.
with to indicate that it will not last more than a number of years. And well, Jame, the junta agreed, and they said a technical team consisting of some ministers and senior civil servants should put together a program which they can call their own program. They call it
Mhm.
correction program or whatever it is. And when it was done and carried out, really, strictly speaking, the actions that they needed, that it was agreed they would carry out, wouldn't need more than even 11 months.
Mhm.
But often it was extended to 18 months, because then the Minister of Justice feared that the commissions of inquiry, the probing he wanted to do, might last a little longer. So he said up to 18 months. And it was when that proposal was given to Jame, and the rather cavalier manner in which they threw it out, that really made me in my mind. I said, look, this is I'm serious. I left. I resigned. And typically, typical of a rogue people, I resigned around about 9, 9 to 10, because in the
Mhm.
morning I had returned from uh, World Bank meeting with my letter done for me over the weekend. And in the morning, I go to my office and ask for an appointment to go and see Jame. When I get to him, and I reported on the meetings that I attended, and he was then already using the same kind of rhetoric. Oh, Western powers.
Mhm.
So I said, look, anyway, that's all right. I mean, I've done what I've done, and I intended to leave, because
Mhm.
I initially, in coming in, had said to myself, I hadn't told them, but I had said to myself that I would do 6 months. I
Mhm.
said, but now I've done only 2 months, but I feel I have done what I can do, and I want to leave. So I
Mhm.
handed it a letter to him himself. He was there with Sana Sabali and a little bit late Tafa Wada, and
Mhm.
I gave him a letter. I went to my office and went home. By 1 o'clock, they were saying they have sacked me. So from there, I
Typical
became the
APRC.
one. I became
Mhm.
the number one. And I remember on one incident when they arrested us and were taken into detention, there was some sort of say, oh, you Bakari, you disappointed us. You disappointed us. We counted on you. One of the first things they said was, well, some of the things they were saying at their
Mhm.
rallies at the time, that I was hiding. I was hiding I was refusing to dig out the dirt about other ministers. I said, look, that had not been put to me. But of course, if they had put to me, I would not have agreed to do it because that was not my job. I'm not supposed to do
Yeah,
that kind of.
true.
Anyway,
So
that was basically how I got involved and how I went.
it's an interesting anecdote. So you ended up resigning and you went into exile.
Yes,
I've never been to exile, but everybody that I speak to talk about just how harrowing it is to be away
yeah,
from home for so long,
yeah,
especially home that has given you so much and you've given so much to home too. And
yeah.
so, uh, looking back at that duration, what was the impact that, if any, it had on you? Both personally and also professionally, and also this impact could also be positive because it is during your exile that I suspect you even went further to for more academic studies. Had also more professional accolades being put to your name. But looking back at the 22-year period of former President Jambe, what is your assessment of their performance so far?
Well, a little bit about the exile, how I found myself in exile.
Yes, yes, yes.
That was also not something I had, planned, as it were. I recall when I returned from the, the last World Bank meeting, it took place in Spain. And the following, it was on a Friday night, I think, and on Sunday, a brother of mine came to see me with a good friend of his. They both have now died. And I revealed to them. Those are the only people I revealed to. Look, I have made up my mind. I'm leaving these people. And my brother said to me, well, if you knew you were going to, why did you come? You should have stayed behind. I said, no, I can I can see that there could be some risk to my freedom or so, but I don't, that's not strong enough for me to not to come. In any case, I couldn't, my family and other circumstances. So anyway, I resigned, and after I resigned, I think a few days after, they had this crazy incident of coming to round round ministers, and they came to my house also and said to me they wanted to see me, and I said okay. I came in, I asked them to come in. They said no, they want to talk to me, and said chiefs, meaning the council, they call them the council, wanted to have a word with me. Yes, it was a very unusual way of calling. But anyway, I joined them and we were taken to Fajara barracks and found out that he had brought all the other ministers there. Now we did about 2 days or so in detention at the what later on became
Forget about us.
the NIA. We were
Oh,
there detained, and during that period, I heard from my former colleagues because they had been experiencing this, and this was frequent thing they were handling. They were being uh, brought in 2, 3 days, 4 days. It was really for me. It was less fear for my life than and more the irritation of being subjected to that kind of harassment. Bring you for no reason. You come make funny statements. So I took the decision there and then that I would not subject myself to living in this kind of condition if I had a chance to live. So as soon as we released, I made plans and left the country. That was the reason why I left, because I thought there was definitely well-founded fear for my life, or
mhm.
at least for my freedom. And that's strong enough for me to want to leave any situation. I don't want to live and remain at their disposal. They come and
Mhm.
take you up and down. So I left, and well, when I left, up to that time, I was still hoping that one way or the other, this military thing would not last. So my first year in UK, I didn't think of a new career as it were. Because I did some amount of odd jobs, I had from my network. I had done some work for the Islamic Development Bank. I had done some work, some couple of universities, some teaching jobs kind of thing, occasionally. But that was really a kind of side thing. I was focused more on following developments in the Gambia. But by 1996, it had become clear that well, we are in for a long haul. So
Mhm.
I decided to look for a serious job, a job really. Maybe also resume my career in another form. And it coincided with the time that I had already almost completed my law studies, because I took up law studies around the time. It was 2 years, and from there I first set myself up as an independent consultant. I did some amount of consulting work for some agencies, worked for USAID and a few others. And subsequently, I got recruited by the UN to did about 12 or 10 to 12 years with the UN.
Wow.
Not wasn't easy life in exile, of course. It's
Hmm.
not easy. You feel the feeling of being uprooted, and in a very abrupt and even brutal way. So my you felt it very much in terms of being separated from your family and other loved ones.
Hmm.
We live very much communal life in the Gambia, as you know, and my departure really had a lot of very significant impact on my family there. There was also the question of getting used to a completely new environment in a way. I had been in and out of Europe before, but this time to come and really settle down, look into
Hmm.
basic things like getting a house, arranging a life. It was a new experience. So that wasn't that easy. It had its ups and downs, but on the whole, I took it as a challenge, and in fact, even had the pleasure of surprising myself with certain skills and capabilities which I never thought I had. For instance, when I got into this country, somebody had given me a laptop during those years, this old type desktop, I think it
Hmm.
was. But I
Hmm.
never even knew how to use the computer. So finding myself here, the first thing I had to do was to go to computer school with my wife. Both of us went. And within a short time, I managed to get the basic skills,
Hmm.
uh, computing, and as I said, I myself surprised myself. I didn't know I was that strong to be able to do all things on my own, including even traveling, booking my flights, and looking,
Hmm.
running after things, which in the past, at least the preceding 10 or 15 years, was done for me with the help
Yeah.
of my government officials. So
Yeah.
I surprised myself that I'm
Yeah.
as strong as I turned out to be.
Yeah. True. Certainly. We can continue this conversation over and over, but I must acknowledge that it's almost 2 hours into your time, and it's late in the United Kingdom right now. And just for our audience too, this is meant to be a two-part conversation. The honorable would be back here for us to talk about, I mean, his party, which is Gambia for All Party, and we are going to get into detail about their plans and programs for the 2026 presidential elections. And you could also recall that there's just a signed divergence that his party, Gambia for All Party, was involved in, among other critical and very important issues that we'll talk about when he has chance again. But Your Excellency, finally, I'm going to wrap this conversation with asking you, really, in terms of everything that you've done for your life, looking back, and now that you've also, rejuvenated your political career in the Gambia through the Gambia for All party, what is your assessment of how far we've come as a country, and what opportunities are there for us as a country collectively for us to really reach and accomplish for ourselves?
Well, the departure, the baseline was what you yourself referred to in the words of Barclay Rice, a very keen, well-informed observer of the time, when he thought we would make an improbable nation, whether our project was not going to result into any success as a nation. Now, looking back at that very modest, very difficult stage, as I said, I think the country made tremendous progress. Uh, and I don't want to sound as if I'm glorifying the part which I was more intimately close with. But I think the first 30 years saw considerable progress.
Mhm.
First, in giving the Gambians two things: encouraging sense of oneness. You must remember that the as a colony, were very much British indirect rule were really a collection of little tribes and districts, administrative districts. Fonyi was one, Nyomi was one, Kiang is one. But there was really not much a sense of belonging, being one. And this was one of the first things that the new nationalist government from 1962 onwards, tried to inculcate, not only by preaching, by practice, by having a system where we have equal opportunities for everybody, irrespective of what ethnic community. The opportunities are there. Of course, some of them are not being enough. They use criteria like merit rather than ethnicity or so. So everything was done to promote a sense of oneness and unity among Gambians. Secondly, experience also over these many years, the first 30 years, gave Gambians the confidence that yes, we can do it. Yeah, that slogan that for which Obama has become famous. I think we have been practicing it. In 1965, at the approach of independence, there are some Gambian families who moved away from Banjul, from Gambia. Some went to Senegal, some went to Sierra Leone. They thought there was no point; it wouldn't work. So, but by 1994, it has become accepted as a fact by all Gambians, whatever their original positions, that yes, we can make it as a country. We have really made it that we can hold together, run a country in a decent, civilized way, maintain a fairly decent democratic system, and even get an economy, growing an economy. See, because that was also one of the fundamental things at independence. There was really hardly an economy to talk about, but it was independence that the nationalist government started, deploying methods of trying to encourage economic in its elemental sense of production, distribution, and exchanges using what resources we have available. Also, we opened up the country. At independence, there was only a small tarred road from Banjul to Brikama. Again, when people talk about what is being done now and compare to the preceding period, I don't even like it because it lumps together, it tends to lump together
Yes.
PPP with Gambia. I don't know
Yes.
what to. But anyway, I make the contrast between what the situation was in 1965 with what it became over time, up to
Mhm.
1994. And we opened the country. We opened the country up to the time I was going to school, up to 1990, up to 1964, that's when I left the country. The main method of getting to Kiang on holidays was by the river steamer. There was no road. There was no all-weather road, and not even an organized transport system. It's not like you go to Brikama and say, "Where is the Kiang garage?" It wasn't that way. It wasn't there.
I
You
think
can
people have a problem, and I think it's mostly the university though that most people worry about. Why haven't PPP government built a university?
Oh, yeah. Well, okay, that's also another thing, another issue. Actually, it's it's um, uh, it's uh, it's one of those misreported,
Yeah.
manipulated issues. The government has done. The PP government placed right priority on education. In fact, two of the uh, founding fathers of Gambian state, P.S. Njai and Jawara, had both been Minister of Education.
Mhm.
And I must say that at least I know that they went in and came out of it with a strong passion for the developing education. Our constraint has always been one of resources. And that was why we adopted strategies that made use of what we had in the most rational manner. For instance, one of the things that you hear, PV government never built any high school. No, that's not true in a sense. Because the thing was that apart from Gambia High School and Armitage, it's true that most of the other schools were, few schools were all missionary schools, Ahmadiyyas and the Catholics and the Anglicans. But really, if you knew it the way I knew it, as somebody who had been Minister of Education, the funding of the system then was still largely government through the scheme they call granting aid. You see, the Catholics would, and there's a lot, they would acquire land and maybe put up initial buildings, but for subsequent uh, budget, recurrent and development budget, they were reliant on the Gambia government, which was providing it. So it was just a mechanism of
Mhm.
funding. It was different from actually taking upon ourselves to say, no, we build the school, we build the school. And it was the same attitude with university. There was always a need for uh, you know highly trained personnel. If the government was spending so much money sending people to Fora Bay and other parts of the world, it's because they realized the importance of it. But because we realized we had to go about it in a way which will be sustainable and solid. I do not underestimate the contribution done by the decision to start the Gambia University. But you can see the pain. It has been a very painful path for those number of years because
Mhm.
it was embarked on at a time when the resource base wasn't there. And that the cost of that is very high, not only in terms of the money, but in terms of the drop in standards quality. So we were not in that position to rush into starting a university, but we had started seriously to think about it. The 1983 15-year education policy, which I piloted and which was introduced in 1987 or 88 when I was Minister of it, actually did provide for Gambia to, make a step in providing tertiary education in the country as opposed to sending people outside. And we had considered all the options, including at the time through a scheme that the Commonwealth was operating called the distance learning. That was one option we considered. Another one
Mhm.
was working as having a collaborative relationship with some institutions abroad, like the St. Mary's University, with finally. So we were really working on that. Jeremy found the policy blueprint there. He just jumped on it, and because of the propaganda thing, and they talk about no. The DP government had no objection to providing university education. We saw the need for it, and we were spending a lot of money.
Mhm.
But it was because of resource constraints that we had to approach it cautiously, and we got to a stage where we thought we could start it on a basis which would be sustainable economically. We are considering the options. It was at that stage that I left the ministry, and shortly after, of course, then I came back. So yeah, that's it's an issue over which, yeah, we get a lot of, I think, unjustified battering by critics. But and sometimes they don't know, or sometimes they know, but they only, it doesn't suit their purpose.
A narrative, yes. Well, we'll have to wrap it here. Your Excellency, thank you all very much for being here, for sharing your really very wonderful, wisdom and perspectives on a variety of subjects that we covered. And I just want to say, it's still so amazing with your age and wisdom, but still how you able to remember so much, the tiny details. I don't know how you're able to stay so sharp, but I hope we're able to do as much well as you're still doing. And I hope that God keeps you around for as long as possible, because we need you. We need you around. We need you to guide and continue to teach us on
Okay.
the various issues that you really have deep understanding and wisdom on.
I'd like to let you know, Ibrahim, it's a pleasure talking to you, and you've been very generous in what you've been in your remarks. I think it's true that I had the privilege of being involved in public affairs, statecraft, you call it, in my country from a very early age. And also, it was to my luck and my privilege that I served in some strategic locations and worked in the Prime Minister's office, worked in the Foreign Ministry, and later on worked in cabinet. Yes, that gave me quite an exposure, I must say. My memory does fail me, but I still retain a few a few things.
Yeah. No, it's wonderful. Thank you so very much. And thank you to your media team as well for all of their commitment in making this happen. We'll definitely have a part two of the conversation, like I said, that will focus on his political party and their programs and plans for the 2026. Thank you all for our audience who are here. You all have a very wonderful night. And please consider subscribing to our YouTube and sharing our content to have a wider audience and reach. Once again, thank you all very much.